Hello and welcome to another flying video at flight level 180. Today we're simming again and we're going to be flying the Carenado V35b Bonanza from FSX. We're going to be flying the FSX version of this Carenado airplane. If you see my other video, you'll know that I flew this exact airplane, X-Plane 11, and discuss some of the good things and bad things about it. And we're going to do the exact same thing here. We're going to fly this airplane in an FSX and do a bit of a compare and contrast. Now you'll know that if you see my other videos, I talk about how I don't really love the Carenado airplanes. I do love how cosmetically pretty they are, but from a performance perspective, they are not great. They don't really emulate real-world performance of airplanes. There's a lot of shortcomings, and we're going to figure out if that is the case here, or if this airplane actually does a lot better than the typical Carenado. So let's jump into the cockpit and see how things look. Let's go ahead and look around this cockpit. I've spent a lot of time sitting in V35Bs, and I can tell you this one looks pretty much as what you'd expect a V35 to be to look like off the factory line. The only things that leap out as being aftermarket modifications are obviously the Garmin Navigator, the G430, and let's see what else. The fuel flow gauge, that is obviously not stock. We have a altitude modification setting here for the autopilot. And then if you look back here, there's a yaw damper. And I don't think they came stock with yaw dampers, but I'm not really 100% sure about that. So pretty nice job on that. Let's go ahead and hide the yoke and start poking around here. So to get the airplane started, we start by selecting a fuel tank. And let's go left. You can see both of our fuel tanks are full. And turn on our battery and alternator. And then we go full throttle. Let's see if I can get that up. Our full prop, full mixture. And then if you watch here on the fuel flow, we're going to click on the auxiliary fuel pump, which is going to prime the engine. So you see the fuel flow comes up to max and then it stops. And now we're fully primed, and then we take and we grab our throttle, move it all the way out, and then slide it in slightly. And then we're going to go ahead and click start. And we've got a good start. Okay, and then we're going to bring our RPMs up to a nice idle speed of around 1,000, 1,200, somewhere in that range. That looks good. And then we check our oil temperature and oil pressure. Oil pressure is good. Oil temp is coming up, so we're looking good there. Now, if you saw my other video, you probably know that I like doing a flow pattern on simple airplanes and then having a checklist at the end of the really critical items. So instead of just going through a million checklist items. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to start down here. We're going to flow around this way, up the panel over here, and then we're going to end over here on the altitude selector. So gas is on the full tank, so we're good there. All these buttons should be in. This is our brakes, so that should be all the way out. Let's check our settings. We have no icing to worry about. We have strobe, beacon, nav, and landing lights on. These are cabin heat. We're going to leave those closed. This is firewall air. Let's keep that closed. This is internal panel lighting. Here is our trim tab. So let's go ahead and trim down. I like to nose down trim a little bit with the weight we have. Cowl flaps open. We'll talk about cowl flaps later. Throttle is correct. Mixture is full rich. We could lean that out for ground operations, but it doesn't really help in FSX. Here are our flaps. Let's make sure those are working. And those are working nicely, but we leave them up. You can see there's a flap indicator here. We leave them up for takeoff unless we're taking off from a very short runway in this airplane. Our auxiliary fuel pump is off. Our gear is down and locked. Our fuses are all in. We're squawking VFR, which is correct, and then we're going to go ahead and set that to altitude. There's our autopilot. We'll get back to that later. Now, this is something that's incorrect. In the real airplane, you click that up, and that turns on the avionics. You can see they're all turning off. So down is correct. So, and then we're going to go ahead and turn on the G430 here. And let's go ahead and punch in our destination. So right now we are at Sky Ranch in Carefree, Arizona, which is the North Phoenix Valley in Arizona, United States. And we're going to fly to to Payson, which is up here, which is exactly the same flight we did in the X-Plane video. So to go ahead and set up the navigator, we're going to click on Direct, and then you click down here. It doesn't work like it should, but it is functional. You can work around it. So key KPAN, and then you click Enter, Enter, Enter to activate. And that shows you that our bearing to where we're headed is 36 degrees, and we're currently at 60 degrees. So it's a little bit off to the left as we expect. So let's slide that guy up there. We want to have CDI on GPS, and other than that, it's looking good. RPM is correct, fuel gauges are correct, instrument air is correct, so the gyro, the vacuum system's working. EGT looks fine, even though it doesn't work correctly in this airplane. Oil pressure, oil temp looks good. Cylinder temperature is coming up. We don't want to go over 1200 RPM until we hit the green arc. Amperage is good, so our alternator's working. No issues here. We know our altimeter is 2992 since we have it set up for clear. Vertical speed looks good. Let's set up our heading bug for runway heading. And since there's no wind, we're going to go ahead and set up our compass for runway heading as well. Now, I did a video on engine outs. I talk about why you should it's a wise thing to set your heading bug to runway heading. I recommend you go watch that. I'll put a link at the end of this video. This looks fine. This looks fine. ADF looks fine. That's interesting. I didn't know you could actually, that's totally unrealistic. NAV2, turn of bank looks fine, and our outside air temperature is fine. And then that's our altitude for our autopilot. So we're gonna plan to cruise for 7,500 feet on the way over there. And we'll talk about some of the shortcomings of that autopilot as we go forward. Let's go ahead and do our run up. So to do that, we're gonna increase our RPM to about 1,700 RPM. You don't have to be precise. And then we're going to pull our propeller back and to get oil into the propeller governor. And the RPM goes down, but the engine sound doesn't change. So that's wrong, but it's generally okay. That's odd. Okay. And then we're going to try the magnetos, and there is no movement whatsoever from the RPM when we do this. We should drop about 50 RPM unless we're lean a peak, and then it'll drop a lot more. So that's just a bug. It doesn't do anything. Pretty disappointed, but it's okay. Okay, so our CHT is in the greens, so we're ready to go. So let's do our final checklist. So we're going to check our compasses to make sure they're correct. Then we are going to check our flaps. They're up. We're going to check our trim is set correctly. We're going to check our fuel tanks, which are set correctly. We're going to check our engine instruments, which are correct. And we're going to check our navigation instruments, which are all correct. So we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and do this. So we are going to accelerate to full throttle, full mixture, full prop. We're going to accelerate to 67 knots and start rotating. And then we're going to climb out. And after about 400 feet, we're going to go ahead and start our a turn to 36 degrees. So there's full power, checking our instruments, RPM, fuel flow, manifold pressure, oil pressure, and EGT. Everything looks good except for fuel flow, which is far too low. We should be at the top of the green arc or above. I think that's a bug, but generally it's okay. There's 60 knots. Okay, there's our rotation speed. Let's get our nose up. Get our gear up. It's very, very sensitive. Gear is coming up, keeping our hand on the button until it is fully up. Gear is up and locked. And we're going to pitch for about, it's very sensitive in pitch. We're going to pitch for about 7 degrees nose up. We're looking to climb out at about 120 knots to keep our engine nice and cool. There is 300 feet. And there's 400 feet. Let's go ahead and make a nice coordinated turn to 36 degrees. Okay, now I would look down and reduce my RPM a little bit, but I think I might have some problems as I do that. So I'm going to go heading. I'm going to go autopilot on. So now as our autopilot is on, now I'm going to hit altitude. And then you notice it resets to 3,400, which it would not do. And then we're going to go ahead to 7,500 feet. So now we're holding a bearing, and we're holding we're holding a vertical speed of 700 feet per minute. So that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and let's check our airspeed. So we're going a little high so we can get our nose up. So this is normally on this autopilot, you would click the center button, and then you would adjust your vertical speed, which says 100, 200, 300, or negative or positive. Then you hit vertical speed engage, and then you would hit altitude arm to lock the altitude, so it would stop, level off when it hits that altitude. But that doesn't work. These buttons are non-functional in this airplane. So what you can do is you can use this button. So I'm going to go nose up, and since we're over 120 knots, we can climb a faster rate, which is probably not realistic. Well, it's definitely not realistic. It's maybe if you were light, you could squeeze out approaching 1,000 feet per minute at 135 knots. But anyway, let's see. So our speed is coming back a little bit. You can hear we probably want to start leaning here. Now, let's get our propeller down a little bit. And the reason I do that, you actually do lose a little bit of power when you reduce your propeller RPM, and the reason is the fuel flow there's an engine-driven fuel pump, and when you decrease the RPM, that slows down the fuel pump, so your fuel flow should drop and your RPM, your power drops. So dropping from 2,700 to 2,500 gives you about a 15 horsepower drop. Not huge, but it's significant. You're going from 285 to 270 at sea level. The reason we do it is to essentially to be a good neighbor. We're ripping out of a residential area at 2,700 RPM. It's incredibly loud, incredibly disturbing, and in GA you want to keep from annoying the people that you're flying over, because that's what ends up with airports getting closed. Now you can hear a little bit. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but the engine is starting to drop in power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean out here. We're over 5,000 feet, so we would lean. So watch the fuel flow gauge. So I'm full rich, so that means I'm at maximum fuel flow. And watch what happens. When I start pulling it out, the fuel flow goes up, which is wrong. It doesn't make any sense. So there's the maximum fuel flow at 60% mixture, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That does not happen. So something's weird there. I think it might be an FSX problem, but it should not go up and then go down. But anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about this. I'm going to turn off my landing lights, and we are climbing out nicely. We're at 120 knots, which is exactly where we want to be. Let's go ahead and turn on the GPS. Go ahead and start using this for horizontal navigation. So to do that, so you can see we're a little bit right of our course. So what we do to get on is we hit direct. It's still a K-pan, so that's good. You hit enter, enter, and then you hit nav. And then if you look over here, the airplane is going to turn left to go and capture that course. And to see the map of the GPS flight plan, you just click on, there's a little hot spot here. Instead of using these knobs like you would in a real GNS 430 or Garmin 430, you actually have to click here. So here's the GPS detail page, and there's the map page, and we can go ahead and turn that off by just clicking. Pretty straightforward. So we're at 6,500 feet climbing out. Now, just to talk to you about, so we talked a little bit about X-Plane 11. Now, I think one major advantage of X-Plane is the leaning and such forth does work much better than it does in FSX. And I consider that almost a drop-dead item. One of the most important parts of flying an airplane like a Bonanza is being able to manage your engine and fly it safely, and keep temperatures cool, stay out of the quote red box. And it's a science and a bit of an art, but more science than art. And you really don't learn any of that when you're using FSX. So what I recommend is, if you're going to fly this airplane and you have X-Plane, or if you're even considering getting X-Plane, I really like X-Plane. It's a huge upgrade in so many ways than FSX. It doesn't have the wonderful missions that FSX has and the gamey stuff. But on the flip side, if you want to learn how to fly an airplane and learn how to fly an airplane correctly and have real world performance, the X-Plane is much better. Now you can buy the Carenado version there. It's got major issues, just like this one. It's got a lot of things that don't work correctly. Go watch my video if you want to see the things that don't work. But you can actually buy something called the Reality Expansion Pack, or REP, which is an add-on that's available in X-Plane that installs over this airplane and fixes a lot of the problems and does a lot of things in a more realistic manner. For example, the leaning works correctly, and it tells you if you're operating at an unsafe level. It's very, very good. And if you want to learn how to fly a single engine piston recip correctly, it's a really good training aid to actually pick up that rep package. So let's go ahead. Now we're leveled off. Let's go ahead and I do some things every time I level off. I'm going to switch my fuel tank over to the other tank. Then I'm going to close my cowl flaps, and the cowl flaps are flaps that are near the front landing gear that increase the airflow to the engine and give you cooler temperatures. So it's better to have them open, and you want to have them open your climb or when you're on the ground, and when you're at cruise and when you're descending, you want to have them closed to keep your engine a little warmer to maintain some heat. And at cruise it's important because it gives you about 3 knots of extra airspeed. So cowl flaps are closed. Now let's go ahead and lean a little bit, quote lean. So it looks like that is our max power, which is the best we can do in this airplane. Now, and that's it. So now we're set up for cruise. Let's bring our engine RPM back a little bit. Now you can see we're at 171 knots, which is maybe a little optimistic, but it's pretty close to reality of what this airplane will give you. So let's go ahead and look at. The airport is behind this mountain. I think instead of flying through the mountain, we're going to fly over here. So let's go ahead and switch over into heading mode. So I'm going to click heading, and you notice this is another bug. Watch this. So if I do that and I click heading, it just pops over to the current course, which is wrong. It does not do that. So let's go ahead and do a course about right about there. And that'll get us just to the left of the mountain, I think. If it doesn't, we can adjust it slightly. Now, I want to show you, it's funny, like the autopilot altitude hold is very strange. So if I just click this 7600, it just starts climbing right away, which is, I find to be very funny. It's not even close to what the real airplane does. So, I mean, it makes it really easy to fly the airplane. I guess it's a bit gamey, but anyway, it's kind of silly. So now that we're cruising along, let's do our flow pattern. So we're on the right tank, we switched it. Both magnetos are on, all of these are in, which is correct. Battery and alternator are on, strobe, beacon, nav are on, that's fine. Panel lights, we don't care because it's daytime. Trim is fine. Cowl flaps are closed. Gear is up. Auxiliary fuel pump is off. Transponder is on. Our GPS navigator set up correctly. Our RPM is good. Our fuel flow is good. You probably, if you were flying this airplane in the real world at 7,500 feet, you'd probably be getting around, well, lean a peak, you'd be getting about 12 gallons per hour. So this is, I don't even know what we're doing here. I guess we could lean it out a little bit, but it's for such a short flight, we're just going to leave it. Everything else looks good here. We know the altimeter at our airport, target airport, is 2992 since we have no weather. You can see we're pretty up near the top of the arc, 174 knots. That's probably slightly faster than we would get. So maybe a really, really slick Bonanza V35b would get that. But, more like 165, 168 knots. True airspeed would probably be more realistic. So, okay, so let's take a peek at where we're going. So our airport is right about there. So what I'm planning on doing is taking and making, turning right towards the airport. Then as we get closer, we're going to take and turn out here, turn left, cross over here, and we're going to do a teardrop entry into the pattern, come down this way and land on runway 6. Okay, so I'm going to set up runway 6. And now, when I talk about the patterns and stuff, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, let's go ahead and go direct to the airport now that we're clear of it, and then we hit nav, and the airplane should adjust. Now, something I recommend for those of you that are considering X-plane or are considering being pilots, what I strongly recommend you do is you get a copy of, well, you'll need an iPad, but get a copy of ForeFlight. And it does not work with FSX to my knowledge, but it integrates perfectly with X-plane. And this is actually an electronic flight bag. It's a application that you install on your tablet, you take in the cockpit with you in a real-world airplane, and if you have ADS-B in, you can see traffic, you can load maps, you can see where your airplane is located via GPS. It's an incredibly rich tool that pretty much almost every pilot is using these days, and I strongly recommend it. And you can use it in X-plane if you want to train how to, fly in the real world and learn the real stuff. Then make the commitment. Get a copy of X-plane. And I'm not an X-plane salesman. I hate to push it so much, but it's just much better if you're into reality. Get a copy of it and learn how to fly. It's pretty wonderful. So if you want to learn how to fly patterns and you want to know how to fly a left 45-degree entry via teardrop to runway 6, you just punch that in on ForeFlight and it shows you the map and you can fly it exactly as you want. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my altitude down to 7,000 feet, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the power back a little bit here. Let's go down to 18. And let's go ahead and bring our prop RPM down a little bit. Okay, so around 22 is good. Now, one thing I found in this Carenado version of the Bonanza is it's extremely fast in the pattern, and the speeds, the manifold pressure I'm using is much, much lower than I would actually use in the real airplane. So just something to keep in mind that and something I'm trying to do, in all airplanes, you really want to figure out a set of speeds that work for you. And you look at this, like we're almost at the yellow arc and I'm at 19 inches of manifold pressure and, going down not very fast. So that's a little tricky. So, oops, I bumped my throttle. Let's get that back up. There we go. So, something you want to do as you're flying is try to develop a set of speeds that work for you. So, if I want to be in the pattern at 100 knots, maybe it's 18 inches of manifold pressure and level flight, and then when I drop my gear, that's going to get me 500 feet down. But it's something you want to play with. It's called positive flying is the term. There's our runway right there. So we're going to try to cut over and fly directly over it and do this and come around and land there. Now let's see if we can get it done. But try to develop a set of speeds that work for you that you can use in all your flying. So we're at not even 18 inches of manifold pressure, and we're at 140 knots indicated. So it's crazy fast. So definitely not realistic in that way. So, but it is a slick airplane and airframe. So now we're getting close to the pattern. Let's go ahead and turn on our landing lights. And let's go ahead and start our left turn. So we're going to go to 90 degrees off of the runway heading, so we cross at a 90-degree angle. You can see we're 3 nautical miles from the airport. We're crossing, so our pattern altitude, airport altitude is 5,500 feet. Pattern altitude is 6,500 feet. We're at 7,000 feet, so we're going to cross over the runway above pattern altitude, and then we're going to descend and circle into the pattern as we cross, and that looks pretty good. Yep, looks pretty good. Maybe we could be a little bit right. So we're going to try to overfly the airport, get past the pattern, and then we'll start descending and descend at pattern altitude and try to do an entry into the pattern and just drop ourselves right in nicely. So, okay, so we're 1 nautical mile, you can see here, from the airport, and as soon as we're over the runway, it'll go to 0. And then we know we can go ahead and start turning a little bit, so we're 90 degrees. Here we go, getting closer. And I'll give you some outside views, but I've been having problems with this airplane crashing. So this is running on another person's, somebody else's. Now we're 0 nautical miles. We're right over the runway. I actually had to switch computers to be even able to record this because it just does not, this airplane does not work on my computer at all. So a little disappointing. I'm using a joystick instead of my full setup, which is definitely depressing. So I'm 1 nautical mile out. Let's go ahead and start dropping down the pattern altitude. And as soon as we're 2 miles, we'll start looping in. So there we go. Let's go ahead and bring our power back. You can see it's just really speeding up quickly. I mean, one of the biggest challenges in this airplane is keeping your speed under control. I mean, the real world Beechcraft and X-Plane 11, and then this airplane, it's really a challenge. Okay, there we go. We are 2 nautical miles. Let's go ahead and start our turn. So I'm just gonna use the heading bug for now, and we'll switch over to hand flying in a little bit. So you know, we would not be this fast in the real world. It's just not going to happen like that. But anyway, it's definitely makes it a little bit harder. Now, some things to keep in mind: your gear speed is 153 knots in the V35b. Your flaps 1 speed is also 153 knots. And your flaps 2 is the white arc, so it's, what is that, 108 knots? There we go. So we are now at pattern altitude. Speed is coming back a little bit. Okay, so this is going to be, that heading right there is going to be parallel to the runway, and if we did this correctly, we might have to fly a little bit towards the runway, but I don't want to get too close because this airplane's so fast, we might have issues there. So let's close that up. We're 3 nautical miles still. There is the runway. Let's go ahead and straighten her out right there. Okay, we are too far. So there we go. Okay, let's go ahead and go parallel. So that is, runway is 60 degrees heading. We're going parallel now. And our goal here, so we're going to drop our gear, beam the numbers, and see if we can, then we're going to start dropping it at 500 feet per minute, making rate 1 turns, and we're going to try to hit this right as we want. So I'm going to go a little bit out. We're way faster than we would be. So let's go ahead and gear down, speed checks. Gear coming down. Okay, let's turn off the autopilot. Autopilot is off. And I'm going to go ahead and drop a notch of flaps because this, I don't think we're going to get it slowed down enough. Okay. There's 900 feet. And I haven't been making any radio calls. You would want to make, this is a non-towered airport, you want to make radio calls as you make your turns. So Payson traffic, white Bonanza is turning left, left base, runway 6, Payson, you know, that kind of stuff. But you know, since we're just trying to figure out how to fly this airplane, we'll keep things a little bit simple. So there we go. Our speed is 100 knots, which is pretty good. So I guess 1 notch of flaps and gear down is actually enough to get our speed down enough. Trying to keep, okay, do a little bit of a sloppy base here, but I think we're okay. There we go. 90 knots. Okay, coming down nicely. Overshot it slightly, but not too bad. Don't like doing that, but Okay, so let's do our gump. So gas is good, undercarriage, mixture is lean, prop is 2200 is where we last put it, but I think we should be okay. We're gonna have to bring our flaps all the way down. Typically I land this airplane with one notch of flaps, not two. It handles a lot better in crosswinds that way, but for the purpose of this flight, I mean, it's so slippery. It's we're just gonna have to do it this way. So let's engine off. It's floating like crazy. It's unbelievable. We'd be on the runway a long time ago in the real thing. There we go. Sounds like a 747 landing. So anyway, that's how it's done. I'll give it a C+ for realism. You know, some things work correctly, like the startup sequence. You know, the panel's good, but the speeds are just completely off. You know, a lot of things are just not right. So let's go ahead and shut it down. So we're going to go flaps all the way up, cowl flaps open. We're going to reset our trim to our standard trim. We're going to turn off our landing lights. So if we were going to taxi, we turn on our taxi lights. We're going to leave our beacon on, nav on, prop all the way in, mixture all the way in, avionics off. We're going to pull out our mixture, and that should shut us down, hopefully. There we go. Alternator off, battery off, and airplane shut down. So there it is. There you have it. That's the V35b by Carenado and FSX. So, you know, it's decent. It's pretty typical, but you know, it's not bad. It's kind of a fun airplane to kick around in. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions or anything else you want to see, please let me know. Thank you.